Well, hello class. Here we are going into Module 11 already. And we are going to be, we just talked about work teams, and now we're going to talk about probably one of the most important chapters, and that is the chapter on communication. Communication is everything. If you can't communicate properly, you can't get anything done. If you can't get anything done, you lose competitive edge in a business and you go out of business. So, how we perceive things, how we receive, we transmit, has everything to do with how we work as individuals and as teams in organizations. So, what essentially makes us effective in an organization. So this is really an important chapter that I want to spend some time on. And I want to go slow with it because of its importance. And the overview of this whole chapter is that in order to be successful, managers must be able to communicate effectively. And what this chapter does is it describes the communication process and the different ways managers communicate to employees. Additionally, barriers to communication are going to be presented in this chapter as well. So what should you learn out of this chapter? What should you take away from it? You should be able to describe the communication process and the difference between formal and informal communication for starters. We talked about this a lot in class. What are the different types of communication? And they are obviously communication flows either from the top down, flows from the bottom up, but the part that we keep forgetting is that it flows laterally. It goes across. So this is what we refer to as 360 communication, so that everybody is on the same page. So last chapter we talked about formal and informal groups. This chapter, what we want to do when we talk about communication is compare and contrast formal small group networks and talk about, the gossip column, the grapevine. And as we know, there are all different types of communication. There's oral, written, and also nonverbal communication, what we commonly refer to as body language. We also want to talk about how channel richness underlies the choice of the communication channel. So how are we going to communicate? What is the best way to get the message across so we know that the transmitter is intending to have his or her message received by the receiving party the same way it was intended by that transmitter? There are all different types of processing messages. So we're going to talk about we're going to be able to differentiate between automatic and controlled processing. We want to also identify common barriers for effective communication. Why is it that people don't get it the way we intended? And we also have cross communication. So we're going to want to overcome some of the potential problems that we have when we cross communicate. So that's kind of the overview of what you should be learning out of this chapter, and what is going to come step by step is a bunch of videos that will explain the following. The communication process itself. That's number one. Before communication can even take place, it needs to have a purpose, a meaningful purpose, expressed as a message to be conveyed. We're going to talk about, and in your book I believe it's Exhibit 11.1, it's going to show the communication process's key components: sender, encoding, message, channel. Okay? These are things that we need to know. What's a formal and informal channel? We'll learn about that. Receiver, decoding, noise and feedback. And then we'll go through all the different types of communication: upward, downward, lateral, and so forth. And we'll talk about the grapevine, the gossip column. Why is it important to have something like that? What are the advantages and disadvantages to the grapevine? We're going to talk about oral written, nonverbal communication. And which method is the best way to get the message across? What choice or communication channel are we going to use? Okay, so that's kind of an overview of things. Oh yeah, one other thing, persuasive communication. We're going to be talking about automatic and controlled processing. What are some of the barriers to effective communication? And what is it all about when we discuss communication apprehension? Different cultures, how do they take in communication? How do they understand different things? We're going to talk about highly context cultures and just context cultures in general. And we're going to talk a lot about culture. So that's kind of an overview real quick. Now look for the videos in reading, listening, and viewing.